All right, Alexander, let's talk about dictator Zelensky, as Trump has now called him.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts? Vance, Waltz, Elon Musk, they're all lining up, and it looks like they're taking down Volodymyr Zelensky.
I think
he's done, huh?
Yeah, I think he's done. I think this was the crossing of the line, actually. Now, I'm going to say what I think happened, because in my opinion, this was a media operation that was organized by someone in Europe, and I'm not going to try and guess who, but though I do have some guesses, and I think it went catastrophically wrong. First of all, we've had all these criticisms from the Ukrainians, which are absurd criticisms, that they were excluded from the discussions, which were bilateral discussions between the Americans and the Russians in Riyadh. Now, Trump got very angry about this, and he made some entirely valid and proper points about the fact that the Ukrainians had many opportunities to come to a peace agreement themselves. We've catalogued them many, many times in various programs, but we could just say quickly, Minsk 1, Minsk 2, Istanbul, everything in between, plus the various possibilities of peace agreements and that kind of thing that could have happened during the war. So Trump said they've had ample opportunity to do that. Instead, they've locked themselves into a war with Russia that they cannot win. And here am I, President of the United States, and I'm doing my best to get this thing ended. And all I get is criticism from Zelensky, and I'm not accepting it. So someone took the decision, and this is a decision made in Europe, to spin Trump's words falsely, as Trump saying that he blamed Ukraine for the war. Now, you may think that is the case, but that is not what Trump said. He never said that. They take one, little comment that Trump made, and they take it completely out of context, and they spin it in that way. But that was not what Trump said. So then they got Zelensky. They started to brief Zelensky and prepare Zelensky for a press conference, which was supposed to put Trump in his place. It wasn't Ukraine that started the war. It was Russia that started the war. And that was going to embarrass Trump in some fashion, maybe push him back towards taking a more neocon position again. And they were also going to threaten Trump by refloating some of the insinuations that were made at the time of the Russiagate affair. And that has already been resurrected previously in articles that have appeared in the British media, just to say, which, as I said, points to who was behind all of this. So they then staged this press conference, and it was a total disaster. Zelensky going out of his way to criticize Trump, insinuating, as I said, all the Russiagate allegations all over again, talking about Trump living inside a Russian disinformation bubble, which is absurd. Refusing, again, outright to conduct elections, insisting that he will not step down until the war ends in some sort of Ukrainian victory, which is unachievable, saying nothing about rescinding his own decree, complaining, demanding more money, demanding more support, all of that. And, of course, that both infuriated Trump and played into his hands because, again, both Zelensky and his backers do not understand what Trump's real purpose is. Obviously, he wants to end the war. Definitely, he wants to preserve Ukraine. But ultimately, his major objective is to get the United States out of a war, which Trump himself never supported, which he believes, probably correctly, would never have happened if he'd been re-elected president in 2020, if he'd remained president after the 2020 election. And Zelensky saying all of those things has enabled Trump to point out that this man is there. He's still demanding more and more money, despite all the money that he's been given already and which the United States will never see. He refuses to make peace. He is opposed to all efforts to make peace. And he's not constitutionally elected now because his term has ended. And, well, Trump uttered the word which many at the back of their minds think that this man is actually a kind of dictator. So that puts Trump in a better position now. Eventually, if peace cannot be negotiated, to do what he wants to do, which is to tell Zelensky, tell the Europeans, look, if you're not going to make peace, and I've never said I will make peace without you. If you're not going to make peace, it's up to you. You go ahead, do it all by yourselves. From now on, the United States is out. Now, if you look at the British media yesterday and this morning, the British have suddenly understood that this danger exists. They're in a total panic about it. They understand that the Zelensky press conference was a complete disaster. I am sure that the same sentiment exists right across Europe, and they are having a meltdown over it.
Yeah, these guys don't watch the Duran, do they? Because we've been saying for 3 years that the more Zelensky speaks, the worse it gets. He's got the same condition that Hillary Clinton and Kamala Harris have.
Yes.
The more you put them out there to speak, the worse it gets.
Yes.
And we've been saying this for 3 years.
Correct.
Keep them in front of a green screen. Keep everything controlled. I don't know. Have him speak very little. But don't put him out there to speak, especially to go up against Trump.
Absolutely.
So I don't know what they were thinking with this last-minute press conference.
No.
But Trump even mentioned the peacekeepers in the same press conference at Mar-a-Lago, where he said that Zelensky's approval is at 4%, and he said that Ukraine has had many times to try and find some sort of solution to what's happening in Ukraine, of which he is 100% right.
Yeah,
100% correct.
Absolutely.
He also said that if Europe wants to send peacekeepers to Ukraine, he's like, go ahead. I don't have a problem with it, he said. It's not going to be U.S., but go ahead.
Yeah.
He said that.
Yes.
So he has no problem to tell Macron and Starmer, who are going to be in D.C. probably next week, to tell them, look, if you guys want to send your military to Ukraine, it's fine with us. We're not going to stop you.
And we're not going to stop you, but we're not going to back you. And that's the problem, because they are insisting that the US back them, and the US isn't going to back them. And the other thing is, Starmer is going out of his way now to antagonize and infuriate Donald Trump on this issue, because over this quarrel between Trump and Zelensky, Starmer has gone out of his way again to back Zelensky. He telephoned Zelensky and told Zelensky once again that he backed him. And of course, Trump is not going to be impressed. He's not going to be pleased. He doesn't like Starmer already. It's bizarre that Starmer doesn't get this, but Trump doesn't like Starmer. He doesn't like the British. He's never forgotten what the British role in Russiagate. Why would he? He's never forgotten that that Starmer himself sent 100 people to help Kamala Harris during the election. Putin, by the way, alluded to all of this in a press conference that he also gave yesterday. So the Americans are going to say to the British, look, if you want to send your 3,000 men to Ukraine, you can do so. But don't think that the United States will support you. As for the Russians, they've said no way. And that, I am sure, is going to stick. The Russians have said repeatedly that this is completely unacceptable, and they're not going to change their position on this.
Well, Starmer doesn't like Trump.
Well,
that's obvious. He campaigned. I guess you could say most of the Labor Party actively campaigned to get Kamala Harris into office.
Absolutely.
I mean, we actually have the incidents that went down in Michigan, the consulting groups from the UK that were in Michigan and consulting with Kamala Harris's team. So, I mean, I guess you could say that Stammer did fire the first shots against Trump, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, no doubt about it. So understanding the situation, I guess you could sum it up as the European Union and the UK were upset that they were not at the negotiating table. And they decided that they would try to bully Trump into getting them to the negotiating table by drudging up Russiagate and Trump's Putin puppet and all of this stuff. And Trump wasn't having any of it. No. Is that kind of the summary of what?
That is exactly it. And
with help from the media.
With help from the media, the European media, and parts of the American media, which were, of course, all over this and which distorted Trump's words, original words in Mar-a-Lago. Incredibly difficult thing to say. And what we saw, exactly as you say, is that the entire administration has now closed ranks. They are now furious. And I think they generally are furious. And, I read somebody who said he keeps an eye on what's being said on X, and that the MAGA movement in general, across the United States, is furious as well. And they are starting to hate Zelensky. I don't think they've ever liked him very much.
Never liked him. They've never liked him.
Absolutely. They've never liked him. But, now, there's a difference between not liking someone and positively hating them. And it looks as if that's where we're going.
I'm monitoring X as well. And I can tell you that now you're starting to get all of the articles about Zelensky campaigning in the United States. Remember when he went to the artillery factory in Pennsylvania?
Absolutely.
And signed the artillery. They're posting those images of him with the Democrats. They're posting articles about USAID and how it funded much of the Ukraine disinformation media architecture, and they're talking about that. Important, very important for me and for you, is that they're talking about Gonzalo Lira.
Yeah.
And Elon Musk is even retweeting information about Gonzalo Lira and what the SBU and the Zelensky regime did to American citizen Gonzalo Lira. David Sachs is also posting videos and information about what they did to Gonzalo Lira.
Yeah.
Once again, an American citizen. And you're even getting pictures from the America First movement of Zelensky's photo shoots with Vogue, his wife's photo shoots with Vogue. I mean, all of this stuff that we've known about and we've been reporting on for the last 3 years is now getting to the masses.
Exactly.
And they're starting to see all of this stuff and they're saying, oh my God, maybe this guy, Zelensky, is not the next Churchill and maybe this war was provoked.
Exactly.
Yeah. So that's all coming out now. I mean, what happens now? Does the EU finally wake up and realize, because even Scholz sided with Ukraine.
Yes, absolutely.
Even Scholz sided with Ukraine.
Bizarrely. They cannot give this thing up. They had that disastrous summit in Paris where they all turned up. And, it's a carefully selected group of people who turned up in Paris. I mean, again, Starmer and Macron were clearly working together, but they picked all of the people who they thought would agree with them. And of course, they all came together and they couldn't agree even on a statement. And they all rowed with each other. And Meloni clearly didn't want to come. And she turned up an hour late and she drove up in her Maserati and she came out, and you see her on the steps in her white.
But she showed up.
Absolutely.
But she showed up.
Oh, she showed up. Yeah.
Yeah.
But anyway, there's a huge thing and all that. And as I said, they can't get their act together. And they're now talking about another 6 billion euros for weapons for Ukraine at a time when there's a major budgetary crisis and all of that. And they're talking about 1.5 million shells to send to Ukraine, which they don't have. We've had all of those promises before, and they're never going to deliver. they can't give up on this. They are still hooked on Project Ukraine. And I've been reading articles in The Guardian, for example, and the Financial Times, and in Britain, still talking about Zelensky as if, he's, a mix of Churchill and Francis of Assisi. I mean, it's quite bizarre to see what they say about him. It's really strange.
Yeah, they complain about the negotiations not being at the table, but, the Russian officials, they've made it very clear that these are bilateral negotiations between Russia and the United States. Why doesn't the EU or the UK, why don't they just set up negotiations with Russia? How come they just don't call Moscow and set up their own bilateral negotiations? I don't think the Trump administration would block it or do anything.
Not at all.
So why don't they do that? And Russia has said that they're open to it.
Absolutely.
Give us a call. Kaya Kallas, how come she doesn't give a call to the Kremlin? Kaya Kallas, she is the foreign minister. Well, she is the foreign minister.
She is the foreign minister, exactly, yes.
So give a call to the Russian foreign ministry and set up a trip to Moscow.
Well,
the point has been made, Alexander, from a lot of people, especially in the comments in our videos, that they excluded Russia from their peace summits.
Exactly.
They had their peace summits, and they were proud of the fact that they were excluding Russia.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what is the EU and the UK complaining about?
Well, exactly.
And why don't they take action?
Well, exactly.
To outflank Trump when it comes to negotiations.
Well, exactly. In fact, they wouldn't actually outflank Trump.
Well,
it would actually, but it would complement Trump.
To complement, or
it would work towards achieving peace. And of course, if the Europeans had something constructive to say, then it would work. But of course, they don't have anything constructive to say because these people don't want peace. That is fundamentally the problem. They want the war to continue and they want the fighting to continue, even as Ukraine continues to lose and Ukraine continues to be destroyed. I mean, it is not setting up a negotiating team. All that it would do is expose the divisions that exist within Europe and their own complete lack of a negotiating strategy and leverage over the Russians, which, they've basically thrown away with all the sanctions they've imposed, the blowing up of Nord Stream and all of that. So that's why they cannot bring themselves to do it. What they want is to keep the war going for as long as possible, and even beyond that, they would prefer to have a situation where the Russians march into Lvov. They can then set up Zelensky as a government in exile in London and keep the war, or at least the conflict, going on in that way. I mean, that's probably the best strategy that they can come up with. But a realistic strategy, one which addresses the actual problems of Europe, they are incapable of putting together. But you're absolutely right. That is what they should do. They should engage in negotiations themselves. They are complaining about the fact that they are not participating in negotiations. As you absolutely rightly say, why should they be involved in bilateral conversations between the Americans and the Russians? Why are the Americans prohibited from conducting bilateral discussions with the Russians? By the way, there was no negotiation about Ukraine in Riyadh. All that happened there was that the Americans said that they would appoint a special representative to speak to the Russians about Ukraine. And the Russians said, fine, when you do that, we will do the same. That was all that happened about Ukraine. They agreed to restore their embassies, the embassies in Moscow and in Washington. They agreed to discuss economic questions. They agreed to just put together expert panels to look into those things. These are all bilateral issues between the United States and Russia. They are not issues that the Europeans or the Ukrainians need to be involved in. If there are going to be wider negotiations, the Europeans can participate, the Ukrainians can participate, but they have nothing to say. The only plan that they ever have put together is one for Russian capitulation. And as you absolutely rightly say, in the various so-called peace conferences that they assembled to discuss this demand for Russian capitulation, the Russians were excluded. Even though by then they were already obviously winning the war. So the Europeans and the Ukrainians, by the way, don't have a leg to stand on this one.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's amazing that, and we were saying this for a while now. We were doing many videos on this. We said that talks between the United States and Russia, they should be framed as more than Ukraine.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what the Trump administration and the Russians did.
Yeah.
So it's much more than Ukraine. They've got all kinds of other issues to talk about. And we've also said it many times, even if they can't come to an agreement on Ukraine, they still need to be talking.
Exactly.
And the Ukraine war, unfortunately, if they can't come to an agreement on Ukraine, unfortunately, the war will continue. Russia's going to win, but at least Russia and the United States are talking.
Yes.
And that's important. That will lead to a resolution in the conflict in Ukraine.
I agree.
Eventually,
I agree.
But that's how they frame the talks, as bilateral talks between the United States and Russia on many, many issues.
Yes.
A normalization of relations, and that's where we're heading towards. We also said in many videos in the past that the Biden White House, realizing that they have lost the war in Ukraine, even though they didn't want to say it, they did realize they lost. What they tried to do, and what they did do successfully, is they tried to get Ukraine over the election hump, the November and then the January 20th inauguration, and they gave them whatever they could to give, whatever weapons they could give, they gave to Ukraine, whatever money they could give, they gave, so that Ukraine can make it over this election hump, in the hopes that the catastrophe of Ukraine would be pinned on Trump.
Yes.
And his administration, and Sullivan, Blinken, and Biden, they got Ukraine over that 2024 marker. Now, in our videos, we cautioned the Trump administration, don't own this war.
Exactly.
Be very careful, don't own this war. I think Trump has done a good job of not owning this war. And my comment to you is that, which is the irony to all of this, is he's done a good job of not owning this war. There were times where it looked like he might own it, especially in the beginning of his administration, but he's now navigated it well enough to the point where, even though this is a Biden, US, NATO, EU proxy war against Russia, Trump has maneuvered it so that he can now say, well, it's not our war anymore. But to his benefit, which is the part that really amazes me, the UK and the EU almost magically voluntarily stepped up and said, no problem, we'll own this war.
Yes, I know.
We'll take it.
I know.
Especially the UK.
I know. Yeah.
Which is the part that I just can't, I can't believe it.
And
they all know Ukraine's lost. They all know that Ukraine's lost.
They all know Ukraine's lost. They all know that they can't take the place of the United States. They're coming up with all these fantasy plans. Baerbock is talking about 700 billion euro plan to rearm Europe, which is, by the way, a fantasy. I mean, I'm not saying the money won't be put together in some way. It would require Eurobonds, and that's probably what this is all about ultimately. But don't expect that we are going to get a European military superpower emerge out of this. It's not happening. I mean, I want to make that absolutely clear to people. If they couldn't organize, even after they already decided that they were going to cut off the Baltic states from the Russian electricity grid, if they couldn't organize stable supplies to the Baltic states after making that decision in 2018. They've had 7 years to prepare. They're not going to get together and create a great, big, powerful military superpower in Europe. It's not going to happen. So nonetheless, they're engaging in all these rhetorical flights of fancy. They refuse to appoint negotiators. They are furious that the Americans and the Russians are talking to each other. They're supporting Zelensky in every conceivable way that they can. And, well, they're setting themselves up for humiliation and disaster, because that's what's going to come. It demonstrates the total, complete nihilism and bankruptcy of the European political class.
Final question. Is there any possibility for Trump and Zelensky to mend fences, to roll all this back, or is it done?
I think it's
done.
done.
Zelensky, his path has already been decided.
I think it's done. To be straightforward about this, my own impression is that Trump has never really taken to Zelensky at all. I mean, he said, I actually like the guy, even though he's a hopeless, dreadful, appalling president and all of that. But after what happened, after that catastrophic press conference, I don't think Trump will ever forget that. And I think that's the reality. Now, it may be that something will be patched up, on the surface, but I can't really believe that deep down the Americans are going to change their views of Zelensky. After all, it's not as if Zelensky's going to change. I mean, he's not going to make it possible for the Americans to forget what he is, because he is what he is. I mean, he is what you see. I mean, this demanding, massively entitled, hugely arrogant individual that you see all the time, manipulative and deceiving, is what he actually is.
Yeah. Just a final thought. No one is really talking about Poroshenko, Banderites. I wonder what they're thinking as they see all of this happen about Zelensky.
Yeah.
I wonder if they're also thinking this is bad. We got to do something. Budanov.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of vultures that I imagine are probably circling around Zelensky as well.
Well, this is actually a very, very important point, because, I mean, when the Russians and the Americans talk about elections in Ukraine, I mean, this is code for Zelensky must go. Now, obviously, the Russians, I don't know that the Americans have any clear ideas about who they want to take over. Maybe it's Zelensky or someone like that. But the Russians, I think, clearly want ultimately someone like either Medvedchuk or someone like that. Now, the people in Kiev, Poroshenko, Klitschko, Budanov, all of them, Maidan people through and through, nationalists, ultra-nationalists themselves, I can very easily see how they could mount some kind of preemptive coup to get Zelensky out so that they take control before any kind of American-sponsored, Russian-sponsored operation is carried out in Kiev. To install someone like Medvedchuk. So we could be seeing some very, very unstable politics in Kiev over the next couple of weeks and months. And of course, Zelensky is far from out. He's still there. He's still in control. He's got the British and the Europeans backing him. He's had these resounding words of support from Starmer and Scholz. Scholz insists that he's the legitimate president of Ukraine and all of that. So, the Europeans will continue to back Zelensky. It's going to be very, very messy and extremely complicated. It's extraordinary. I've never forgotten what you said right at the outset, before the special military operation began, about NATO, that it was an extraordinary hill to choose to die on, which was Ukraine. And here we see the Europeans doing that all over again. They're now dying on another crazy hill, which is Zelensky, protecting Zelensky. I mean, it seems most extraordinary. Of all the people they could have chosen to support, they're going to sacrifice themselves on the altar of the Zelensky cult. It seems most weird.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
All right. We will end it there. TheDuran.locals.com. We are on Rumble, Odyssey, BitChute, Telegram, Rockfin, and X. Go to the Duran shop, pick up some merch like what we are wearing in this video update. The link is in the description box down below. Take care.